Okay, everyone. Welcome to Let Me Tell You Why That's Bullshit. That was indeed Canadians' Prime Minister, newest elected Prime Minister on Monday night, rocking out to Down with Webster. Love it. Makes me feel old, especially seeing a 60-year-old rock out to them, but I'm okay with that. Rio, German, how are you?
Good, and tired, as you can imagine.
Yeah, I'm alive. It's a Wednesday.
I can't imagine. I was up till 3 o'clock in the morning on Monday, and then I was doing election stuff all day yesterday, and then all day today. After today, I'm done for at least like 3 days until Monday. I'm done.
I'm enjoying it. It's just tough to manage when I'm studying as well. So that's all.
I mean, I just had work, and I just didn't really want to work. So then after the election, I was like, oh, thank God it's over. And then I proceeded to play Oblivion for the next 2 days. So.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I had like a massive panic attack on Sunday night, and I don't know if it was just like my autism being like, you have worked way too much this week on politics, or if I was just like super anxious about what the election results would be. As of like Monday night at about 10 p.m. Mountain Standard Time, I was feeling better, so I have my suspicions about where that lays, but that's okay. I think I was just way too involved with elections. Definitely takes a toll on your mental health.
Yeah, as it does.
It always does.
Well, and I've been like, I do geopolitics, as you both know, too, right? So I've also been trying to keep up with like the insano Trump stuff. Like right before this, I was watching him do his interview with, I don't know, some guy in the White House this week, and he was arguing with him about whether or not Garcia's tattoos were photoshopped, and about how he like had an MS-13, like the letters MS-13 tattooed on his hand, and the reporter was like, no, that was proven to be a Photoshop. And Trump spent like 5 minutes arguing with this guy, and I was like, I can't with politics anymore.
Plans.
Rio, sneak peek of our next episode.
Cool. Looking forward to it.
But until then, let's talk election night drama. Election night was weird. Oh my gosh. German and I talked about this yesterday, Rio. But between the polls being... I've been thinking since our conversation a lot, German. And we will get into this in a bit, but there's like a bunch of questions I have because the polls seem to be super wrong. But then like, were they really? Because they were showing the collapse of the NDP, and it looks like pollsters kind of misredirected where a lot of those votes were going. So of course, that translated into insane stuff in Quebec because nobody actually thought the Bloc would lose 10 seats. They thought all the gain was going to be in Ontario. We'll talk more about Ontario, but the gain didn't happen in Ontario. In fact, Conservatives went up. They gained 12 seats in Ontario. Pierre Poilievre lost his seat. He is no longer a member of Parliament at the moment. His Conservative leadership is kind of up in the air. We'll get to that too. The Conservatives started strong in Atlantic Canada, which kind of, as soon as I saw that, I was like, this is going to be a weird night. So I wanted to start off by asking you guys, and I don't know, Rio, how much election coverage you watched, but I know German and I were watching some. So like, what was sort of the moment on Monday or over the last couple of days in stories that you've seen that just kind of like made your jaw hit the floor? Like, what was the thing where you were like, holy shit, what the fuck am I watching right now? German, you go first. I'll let Rio think.
Okay. There's so many things I could talk about. As you know, like we talked about it a bit yet. Yes, it was yesterday, right? Mm-hmm. And honestly, the big story I thought was like, holy shit, with Pierre Poilievre losing his seat. That was number one.
Yeah, nobody thought that was going to happen.
Nobody thought that was going to happen. I know I had mentioned before, people had brought it up.
Yeah.
Previously, like I think a week earlier about it, like he could lose his seat, but I don't think people really took it seriously enough.
No.
Especially with the fact that, the Conservatives gained seats as well. And that was pretty surprising that they gained seats. They got official party opposition, which most people expected anyway to happen. But then Pierre Poilievre lost his seats. So I think that's the biggest surprise. Like I was like, when I saw this, like, is that really happening? And then hearing him speak made it even like, what is happening now? Right?
I kind of think more than just like Poilievre losing his seat. And we'll talk more about that because I think there's a lot to unpack. But his speech, like, I don't know, Rio, if you watched it or read it, but he was pretty humble. Like, it was weird. And he was talking about like unity, and then the crowd started booing when he congratulated Mark Carney, and he was like, no, we have to come together as Canadians. And like, it actually kind of sounded sincere. So I don't know if he was just like trying to be like, oh shit, I might lose my seat, which means I'm gonna have to like
get a job.
No, I think he was thinking, I'm going to have to really figure out how to convince the Conservatives to keep me, because 4 leaders, 4 losses, 1 new leader. Like, they do not take kindly to losses. He has to, under their constitution, there's a mandated review. So that's going to have to happen regardless. And so I honestly think that it was either him trying to figure out how he immediately had to pivot now. And like, because German and I talked about this, that whole speech was him basically being like, please, Conservatives, don't throw me out on my ass. Here's all the reasons you should keep me.
Yep.
I don't know. Like, did you get that impression, German, when you watched it? Because that's how I felt.
Yeah, I definitely did. And the one thing that really, I watched it again, briefly again, which weirdo, studying accounting, watching a politician speak. And I saw him start to tear. I noticed he was tearing up a bit when he was speaking. And that for me was kind of interesting to see because, Pierre Poilievre.
You don't expect that from Poilievre.
No, you don't. And you know him as an attack dog. And I'm sure Rio can attest to that too. You know him as an attack dog, the guy who fights, like tooth and nail and doesn't care about how other people feel. I'm going to say what I want to say and do what I want to do type of situation. And to see him like kind of tear up, especially I think when he was talking about, that we have to come together and do things like that. That kind of surprised me because it showed a bit of emotion and showed that he actually not maybe caring is not the right way to put it, but he actually kind of was being authentic with people, right?
I don't know.
Or
I still find it hard. I still find it hard to believe that he was authentic in any way. I just can't decide if he's like trying to immediately manage the new image he's going to have to put forward. And again, we'll talk more about this, or if he was just in shock. So we'll put a pin in that, but we'll come right back to it. Rio, stories you've seen over the last couple of days. What was your like holy shit moment?
So full disclosure, I didn't watch a whole lot of election coverage just because of a variety of things happening between, on Monday night.
Yeah, but you must have like heard stuff.
Oh yeah, I did. And then the next morning I turned on CBC and I saw a whole bunch of like, I just watched, I watched the national and the news.
That was still election coverage. Rosemary Barton didn't go home.
Oh yeah, it was great. And like, I wanted to, and like, in addition to like Poilievre losing his seat, and for me, a lot of what I saw was just kind of like Reddit memes at one point too, because I was like, okay, well, I have to go to work now, and I just may as well just scroll Reddit. And my favorite was seeing Rosemary Barton comment on Conservative voters in Poilievre's riding, and you could see them like, very stone-faced, very upset looking, just like crossed arms, closed body language type of deal.
Oh yeah, and they were like,
oh yeah, and
those
she's
pictures
like,
were crazy.
Yeah, it's like, well, that's the face you make when you thought you were going to win, but now you're not winning, right? And I was like, yep, that's pretty accurate. In terms of the actual results, I'm not totally surprised that the Liberal minority. I'm kind of surprised it was that close, if I'm being honest. Like, it's 3 seats away from being majority, basically.
Mm-hmm.
And like, given say 10,000 votes in 3 other ridings, it's entirely possible that could have just become a Liberal majority government. And like, seeing the Bloc lose and then the NDP lose and then like the Conservatives gain so much is very strange. But at the same time, like, the end result is still what we've basically been doing for the last 6 years almost with the Liberal minority government. And in terms of what that means politically, I feel like that's a good thing, is because minority governments incorporate more voices just by nature of what they are. So we'll see what that means going forward, but I'm not super surprised. I just had a lot of fun looking at like, oh yep, Poilievre lost. And with regards to what you guys are saying about his speech, I have some opinions on that, and just like I'll wait for when
We'll
we
get
talk
to
about
those
that
in
more.
a minute
But
and a half.
yeah, but like not like I have opinions, so I'll let you drive it forward, Nick.
Yeah, I mean, it was kind of crazy, right? Because there was also still a lot of voter like left splits.
Mhm.
And German and I talked about this through the whole campaign, like what would happen if the left split. And what happens is the conservatives come up the middle. So for me, and this is a good segue into having the conversation about Poilievre and the future of the Conservative Party, is what happened in Ontario. I think that really shocked me. Not so much that the Conservatives gained in Ontario. What surprised me was how it shook out, because, and we didn't know, German and I were texting till probably like 2 a.m. on Monday, watching and trying to figure out like what is happening here, because it was unclear on Monday night whether Ontario around the auto sector was going to go blue, or if waiting on the advanced polls would then flip it red. And one of the big surprises to me was the NDP vote going blue. That was completely shocking. And that kind of leads me to the future of the Conservative Party and Pierre Poilievre. So I guess we can start off with like my first question on that before we get right into Poilievre. And that is, and if you're in that area and you have either talked to people or you are one of the voters that went like would normally vote orange and you voted blue, leave us a comment, because I genuinely am fascinated by this. We know that the Conservatives like went really hard to get the working class vote. They've done a really good job of that in places like Nova Scotia, as we saw. Like they didn't think they'd keep any seats in Nova Scotia, and they managed to flip some red seats in Nova Scotia. But the Power and Politics host David Cochrane pointed out, being from there, that there's a lot of oil workers there. They managed to hold the working class vote in both Saskatchewan and Alberta, who actually, I should pull this up because it's super interesting while we're talking about this. They managed to hold the vote in Alberta and Saskatchewan. So my question is, do people actually think that the Conservatives were better for the working class? And if that's the case, I want to know why. So like, guys, leave a comment. I'm super interested. But given Poilievre's past with anti-worker legislation, like he has a 25-year history of this, right? So I'm genuinely curious, was this, and what do you guys think, was this a we think he's better for the working class, or was this a he's better for dealing with Trump? Like, as Danielle Smith said, you know, he's seen as more ideologically aligned with Trump. So did people in that sector think, hey, we need somebody who can relate to Trump and maybe make him be like, please don't ruin our lives? Before you guys answer that, I'm just going to explain this. So this was a voter breakdown that I found to show exactly what the percentages were in each province. It was effing close. Like, look at this, 4350 in Manitoba. These numbers are, we know that.
Alberta and Saskatchewan don't count.
Yeah. 4744, 4456. Prince Edward Island, 100% Liberal. That's nothing new. But even these numbers up over here, right? Like they thought, the polls showed that all of Atlantic Canada was going to go red, and a lot of it still did, but even like these small slivers really helped push them forward. So let's quickly talk about that question. Like, what do you guys think? Like, Rio, go.
Sorry, could you reframe the question? Because now I got blank. Now I'm looking at this diagram.
Okay, so do you think that voters in Ontario, because there was a lot of orange to blue,
okay,
and pollers thought that it would go orange to red, but it didn't. In these working class areas, particularly in places like Kitchener and anywhere where like the auto sector was prominent, they went orange blue. So did they go orange blue because people genuinely think now the conservatives are better for the working class people? Did they get that message out? Or is it that people were like, we need somebody that can deal with Trump, and we need that person basically to be liked by Trump, because we know that Trump will help his friends as long as you kiss his ass. Probably literally.
Okay. Yeah. And so thinking back to kind of just like leading up to the elections, like in the last month or so, CBC did a few panels of like voters in different areas, including like Windsor and Kitchener, Ontario, right? And even there, I don't think that it was a lot of like, actually, no, it's not. I think part of it was that, yes, they actually thought that Pierre Poilievre would be better for the industry. Because I remember there was one guy, he was a tradesperson, and I think this was in Windsor. And they were talking about how, like, and they got to talk about how it's like, well, everyone else at the table was like, well, I'm kind of worried about Donald Trump. And he was like, well, I'm not worried about Donald Trump. I want to make sure that like I have job security, And that was why he was very like pro Poilievre. And paraphrasing, obviously, I don't remember everything exactly that he said, but I think that yes, Poilievre did actually manage to get that message out that like he would be better for labor. But you look at his history, and he clearly was very anti-labor for a very long time, right? And like, compared to the other people on said panel of just like random citizens in Windsor, Ontario and Kitchener, Ontario, like, this guy was a standout because the rest were like, well, we're kind of focused on Trump, we're focused on tariffs, we're focused on the trade war and how it's going to affect us. But there was that shift in perspective of like, well, this guy who was definitely leaning more conservative, and even said so on the panel, that like, no, what's happening south of the border doesn't matter. What's happening internally is what matters most. And I think that's kind of also where it aligns too, because a lot of the conservative platform has always been kind of like more protectionist and like more just like, nope, we're Canada, just isolate Canada a bit more, similar to the United States. That's my thought.
German thought?
Yeah, I think you hit a few things, Rio, and I think a few things you talked about definitely played a factor, but I think it wasn't just one factor.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
I think it was multiple things and various things that affected it. And I think part of it had to do with the fact that certain groups and certain demographics of people really didn't like Poilievre.
Yeah.
Right? Or really didn't like Carney. And I think talking to people like my friends, talking to other people, I've heard that sentiment across the board. It doesn't matter like who they voted for. The people in Alberta, just in general, just don't like Carney, mostly.
I mean, people in Alberta don't like anyone associated with red.
Correct.
Or orange. But
yeah, and that's the thing. Like I had a friend send me a message today and a bit of yesterday saying, we're going to separate now. And I'm kind of like, okay, so
they say that every election.
Like when and who, what, when, where, why. And that's the thing. And I was watching a clip this afternoon on Daniel Smith saying that she's not going to push the separation question. It's up to the citizen to do it. Right. And so I think it was multiple factors. But at the end of the day, I think certain demographics of people really, really wanted stableness, which Carney provided, and Poilievre did not provide. And when it comes to that riding particularly, I think people just got really fed up with what he was doing. And they got turned off. And they were saying a bunch of people probably really didn't really like how Poilievre was approaching the election.
Oh, in Poilievre's riding.
Yeah. And so I think people really either liked the guy or hated the guy.
Oh, yeah, that's always how it's been with Poilievre.
And it hasn't been in between. And I think people just said, if I'm going to vote for anyone, I'll vote to kick him out, right? And they did that, right? And the fact that he got voted out is huge for that party, considering they made gains across the country.
Yeah, okay, so let's talk about this. So the Conservatives made gains. They were up 12 seats in Ontario. Poilievre got booted, and a lot of people that they talked to in that riding, and a bunch of different media outlets obviously interviewed the Liberal candidate who's now an MP to see what he was hearing at the door, and that's just bang on. People didn't like the rhetoric. They didn't like the Trump talk. And so this brings me to another question about the Conservative Party. And Rio and I have talked about this before. And I think German, you and I have talked about this before as well. If if the Conservatives want to actually be a party in Canada that doesn't just win because the NDP and Liberals happen to split the vote and they form a majority government, because like the numbers we were seeing would usually put them up above the required seat number to get a majority number simply because of that vote split on the left, right? And even a Conservative panelist on CBC was talking about how they need to figure out how do they address that. And I think one of the lessons to take away from exactly this, the Conservatives made gain. They had huge rallies, but Pierre Poilievre lost his seat. And I think one of the things they need to look at is maybe moving away from being progressive Conservatives isn't helpful. So I kind of wanted to have a talk about this move towards more of an extreme right ideology in a Canadian climate. Who wants to start?
I can start because
Okay.
I have lots of opinions. And okay, so first of all, I'm going to just say this again. I think that merging the Reform and Progressive Conservative parties was a mistake, because now you've had this exact problem where, like, as time has gone on, the party has just progressed further and further to the right, which hasn't helped at all, right? Like, you know, if you've had years for like the last, or losses for the last like 10 years, and it'll now be 15 courtesy of this election, like, clearly something about your policies isn't resonating enough with enough Canadians to really make things matter, right? And like, you can take Poilievre's like idea of just basically taking the Trump rhetoric and platform and be like, well, Canada's broken, da 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 da, and like, yeah, that doesn't resonate with me. I don't think Canada's broken. We have problems. I don't think that it's that awful, though, right? And before anyone was like, oh, but like housing and bread and da 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 da, it's like, first of all, I totally understand that like things are going crazy. I know how much I pay in rent is absolutely insane, and I also know how much I paid for a loaf of bread at the grocery store the other day was crazy too.
I'm just thinking about who you pay rent to. So
Yeah, I know. So like, I just want to point out that like even there, it's still just one of those things where it's like, well, like it could always be like, frankly, it's all like, yeah, it's not great, it's not awful, and things can get better. But at the same time, I also see like, I see houses being built, I see condos being built, I see a lot of work being done to try and address these issues. So like, yeah, it didn't get fixed right away in 1 year, but like, what do you expect? We have 8 months of winter in Canada and 4 months of summer. And if we're being really generous, that 4 months is like barely enough to really get things done, especially when you consider in Alberta where it's fire season, right? Like, how do you get anything done when Fort Mac burns down every year? So, yeah, I think policy-wise, I think that the Conservative Party needs to actually like take that shift and like really look at themselves and say, like, is that really what we want to be? Do we want to be like the Canadian version of the Republican Party, more or less, with a leader who keeps pushing that rhetoric? But at the same time, we see that that works, especially in places like Alberta and Saskatchewan, where we've always had like, you know, conservative governments, and especially in Alberta now, where we have Danielle Smith, like, you know, it's not saying she's going to push separatism, but has been pushing separatism for years, right? Anyway, that's my thought there. But I do think that they need to change. And hey, maybe we just split the party again, go back to Reform and Progressive Conservatives. You know, maybe you're more likely to win.
isn't that kind of what happened though with the People's Party? Oh my gosh. Okay. The one thing that I was like, I thought was hilarious on Monday night, because being from Alberta and being a small L liberal, I hated Jason Kenney. And when I saw that that's who CBC had on for their panel, I was like, dudes, this is how you get me to turn this off. Of course I didn't. I stuck through it. And at one point he left, and I thought he was taking his ball and going home, because he disappeared for quite a while. But then he finally came back out and he was talking or whatever. And he said about the People's Party, he was like, yeah, you can take a fork and stick it. And I was like, holy shit. He was not mincing words. It was really funny. But like, that's kind of what I guess surprises me a little bit with the Conservatives, because that like right-wing I would almost say like even farther right than Trump, split off, right? And moved into this People's Party. And I know that people say like, oh, Alberta and Saskatchewan, but like, frankly, you could run a blue rock in Calgary and it would, for the most part, win. So I think, and the Conservatives, it's not like they're during a federal election spending a lot of time in Saskatchewan, Alberta, because I mean, I've seen Jason Kenney stand on TV, who used to represent me, and I remember one year he was asked, oh, what are the numbers like? And he laughed and said, I don't need to look at the numbers. I know I'm winning, which is just like insano arrogance. So they really don't need us. But what they do need are center voters. And so if they don't want to just have to wait for the NDP and Liberal to split the vote, and we don't know what's going to happen. I mean, the last time the NDP lost official status was in the 90s, and they did manage to claw their way back up. And I suspect there was a lot of vote lending, and this isn't going to be a problem in the next election. And we can talk about how this is going to impact the Liberals, but the Conservatives really need to figure that out. German, thoughts?
Yeah, you make a good point. The Conservatives definitely need to figure it out.
The
Conservatives definitely need to figure it out, is what I said.
I was like, when did you become a Poilievre conservative?
Maybe I just did. Well, you know, I'm definitely gonna get fans now in Alberta, right?
Flipped right after the election. You know?
Right after the election, right? I somehow got fans now, right? But all kidding aside, the Conservatives definitely need to figure it out. And, you know, like at the end of the day, like the Liberals made huge strides across the country too, but yet they couldn't even get enough seats in Alberta too. So I think, like you said, you can throw a rock in any type of thing like Alberta, and you would win most likely. And I was talking to one of the guys. His dad ran as an NDP candidate in where I live. And he mentioned his dad was very disappointed with the results because they actually didn't do as well as previous elections. And even though the Liberals did very well in that riding, the Conservatives actually increased their votes on top of it. So it seemed like instead of voting for the NDP, it went to the Liberals and it went to the Conservatives in that riding. And so that's interesting hearing that from a son of a guy who ran in riding. So even though Liberals made huge gains, Conservatives also made huge gains in some of those ridings. And so the Liberals couldn't catch up, even though they made, like I mentioned the other night, it was one of the best in that particular riding in many years, right? So I think that if the Conservatives are going to win across the country, they have to somehow make those same gains as well, if not more gains across the country. And the Liberals, if they want to win Alberta and particularly in Calgary, they have to make even more gains than Conservatives are making too, right? And they have to get both those. They have to get the votes both from the Conservatives, but they also have to get votes from the NDP, which they have to continue to do.
And the Bloc too, right?
And the Bloc, but there's usually no Bloc in Alberta anyway.
Well, there's no Bloc in Alberta, but I think as we see,
that's what made the Liberals win. They got 10 Bloc seats. They all went to the Liberals, and we'll talk about this in a minute, but the Liberals basically owe this minority government to the Bloc. Like the final seat count was like, what was it? Oh, I had it pulled up. It was like 169, 144, I think. So if there was any kind of move at all with Bloc or NDP, like if the NDP had gotten just a few more seats, the Bloc hadn't moved, like the Conservatives, this is another thing, right? The Conservatives would have come up the middle and taken those seats. So,
and Blanchette even said, like, after the election too, that like Quebec now, like even though they lost seats, Quebec still has a very strong voice in government because now they've because it's another liberal minority government. Pardon me.
Yeah,
but
and there are other reasons for that, and we'll get to that in a minute. And it's gonna be an interesting few years for sure. But one of the other things that I wanted to quickly talk about with the Conservatives is, and I guess this applies to the Liberals too, because we can analyze this, talk about, okay, the Conservatives need to become more center. That's pretty much always been the case. But then we can also look at this election and just be like, this election was weird. Everything was wrong. Nothing went as pretty much anyone thought it was going to be. So then, as David Cochran asked on Power and Politics, like, how does that actually translate into lessons going forward? Like, what as a party can the Conservatives take, and are they going to? So I guess my question is, like, for the Conservatives, being more centrist is not a new thing. If they want to win, they know they have to be more centrist. They just choose not to. And in fact, have every time they lose, they pick a more right-wing leader. I mean, I was sitting there watching, and when Andrew Scheer came up and he won his community, I was like, you know what? Bring him back. I'm fine. He can be prime minister. Yeah. Let's go that route. But they don't. So I guess, like, what lessons do the Conservatives, like, is there anything new that they can actually learn from this campaign? I guess that would be fairly relevant. Again, considering that this was a weird once in a lifetime election. Like, it'll be really interesting to watch the election in 18, 24 months, 4 years time, what happens there, because this was so weird. This was very much a vote for prime minister. Do you want liberals or conservatives battling it out for Trump? Which, interestingly enough, as a side note, which maybe you guys can comment on as well, is that I also wonder if maybe the Conservatives' crazy mixed up messaging actually helped them a little bit here, because we know for the longest time, the Conservatives had no idea what the hell their message was. They tried Axe the Tax. They tried Carney is just Justin Trudeau. They tried affordability. They tried crime. And one of the big criticisms of Poilievre's campaign was that he was just all over the place. But in talking to people that voted Conservative over the last few days that I've been watching on the different networks, like, people were all over the place about why they voted for the Conservatives, and they fit into every one of those categories. So I've kind of been watching that and being like, well, that probably helped them to some extent. German, you take it first.
Yeah, there's a lot there. In terms of your first part, what the Conservatives need to learn. Conservatives need to learn quite a bit of things. And I think that's a given. I think anytime you win the election or anytime you lose the election, you need to learn from those elections anyway. In terms of the Conservatives, I think they need to learn how to pivot is number one.
Yeah.
Because I think the big one right now is that they didn't pivot enough. And even though they received more seats, they didn't pivot enough in order to get more seats than their votes, right? And I think they weren't able to define Carney the way that they wanted to define Carney, right? Pierre Poilievre, you kept on talking about Justin Trudeau on the debates. He kept on saying, you're Justin Trudeau, you're Justin Trudeau. Well, Justin Trudeau is not there, like, number one, right? So how can you criticize someone? Yes, he might have been an advisor, but Carney said he's his own man. Actually, Carney is smarter than Justin Trudeau by far, right? Do you think he would always take Justin Trudeau's opinions now that he's prime minister? I don't think so. So I think the Conservatives, number one, have to learn to pivot, and they have to be adaptable. And I think that extreme right-wing side of it, Trumpian or MAGA area, they have to be very careful, because they're going to turn off a lot of people who are center moderates in the process. And that's what's going on just in general, right? Like, if people like myself who are center moderates, which I've already told people on other podcasts, wouldn't vote for Poilievre because he's too right for us, right? Yeah. So I think the Conservatives really need to understand that if they really want to grow their votes across the country, especially in big areas like in Ontario, which are heavily liberal focused, they will not get the mega and Trumpian factors in those ridings. And we know, going to Ontario, they have to pick up those seats to win the election, because otherwise they lose the election. And they are very strict on the west side of the country. So if they can't pick up the moderate liberal, people who are maybe socially more liberal focused, they're not going to win the election. They're not going to win for a long time. The only way they win is that the vote collapse across the board, right? For the NDP, right? And it's definitely collapsed, but at the same time, it's something that they would have to understand if they want to. And the leaders they have been electing are not moderate leaders. We know that. They are very, right-leaning leaders who are focusing on separation and other things like that, which doesn't help their cause.
Yeah. Rio?
Yeah. I agree with German on the pivoting thing, because and I think you're right, Nick, that having the kind of hodgepodge all over the place messaging did help them, because I'll pick on my girlfriend's family as an example, because we had them over one day and we got to talking about they were like, well, who do you think we should vote for? I was like, well, I can tell you what the platforms are and kind of generally what they do, but I can't tell you who to vote for. And they were like, well, who's pro-immigration? Who's pro-immigration because they're all immigrants? Who's pro-healthcare because they all, use the healthcare system? And who's pro-education? And I was like, I mean, if you want those things, you probably want to vote NDP, but
maybe don't do that either right now.
Yeah, but I was like, but all things considered, at the moment, if you want a candidate who's more likely to win, you would probably want to vote Liberal. And then they were like, well, then they brought up other things, who, but what if they're pro-abortion or pro-da-da-da? And I was like, well, I mean, you kind of take what you can get with the system, right? The way that voting works in Canada is it's first past the post. Whoever just gets the most votes wins. So, you have to take that into consideration. That's why I think there's a lot of strategic voting, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm a strategic voter. I'll absolutely concede that point.
Yeah.
And having that hodgepodge messaging makes it easy for people to see. It's oh, well, I'm worried about crime. I'm worried about seeing addicts on the street and all this other stuff, or I'm worried about the border, or I'm worried about whatever. And having that, hodgepodge of messages can probably help you with that. Now, was probably an accident that it worked out, if I'm being totally honest. I'm not sure if it's the strategy you want to have going forward, because then you have a very non-unified campaign.
Yeah.
But that's something to just think about. And then I don't know, it's just strange to me that and sorry, I just wanted to say as well, German, you're right about the pivoting as well, because they waited until the last possible minute to drop platforms. And I'm not just blaming the Conservatives for this; it's all of them. And the Conservative Party,
2 years. It's insane. They've been asking for an election for 2 years, and they dropped it 4 days before the election.
Yeah,
and it was half just Poilievre pictures.
Yeah, on the day that polls closed, right? Because or advanced polls closed. So it's I mean, clearly you weren't really betting on policy to win you this one. If I'm being totally honest, you kind of just thought Poilievre and his rhetoric would work. But I think if they really do want to win, they kind of have to start evaluating do we want to keep fielding further and further right people? Because clearly Canadians aren't really resonating with that over the last 15 years. And to be fair, they did gain seats, which is kind of terrifying in its own right. But at the same time, I think there's something to be said about well, this hasn't worked for 15 years. And then I also have opinions about the whole use of social media and TikTok and everything to appeal to voters nowadays too, because there's a whole thing to unpack there about how that could absolutely influence an election going forward. But that's something else to think about for another conversation, not one immediately following an election.
I just want to add quickly, Nick. Honestly, Rio makes a good point about the whole platform thing, right? That platform thing was done intentionally.
Oh, of course it was.
And it was done because they didn't want to release whatever they want to do. Because and that's the thing. The Conservatives are just hiding all the time these things. And they refuse to kind of be transparent. And it doesn't help the fact that the messaging is off. We heard Conservative pundits on various news outlets say how badly run their campaign was and how controlling their messages was. Half the most of the
even Corey tonight came out and was what are you people doing?
Yeah, and honestly, you have these candidates who don't even respond to the media, so they're controlling everything in the.
I mean, that's not new. That's not a new Conservative.
It's not a new thing, but it's so crazy because the fact that if they want to pivot, they want to change the mixed messaging, it doesn't help anybody, right? At the end of the day, right? It creates more problems for moderate people. Yeah. And the only ones who would vote for Conservatives are the people, of course, in Alberta, because it's a given, right? And the people who are more separatization stuff, right? Yeah. So I think the conservatives, if they don't change those messaging, they are not going to get people in Ontario. Right?
Yeah, and I mean, the whole media thing didn't help. And even on election night, I lost count of how many like jabs David Cochrane got in about how like the Conservatives wouldn't, like, literally their media was chasing them because they wouldn't allow them on the plane or the buses or anything. They were just like, this is where we're going to be. And I think it was every time they went to their Conservative correspondent, he was like, thanks for chasing the bus. Every time. Harper got backlash as well when he kicked media out of the hallway and had them move back, right? I've talked about this with Rio, his former MP, my still current MP, although Rio, he only won with 68% of the vote, not 85% of the vote, which is huge in our riding. He used to talk to his constituents, but since Poilievre became leader, he has been muzzled and only talking about talking points. He was always somebody that he would take meetings with me. We'd have really good conversations. I would ask his advice on some things because I was very involved in trying to get some laws changed for victims in Alberta, which we were ultimately successful on. But those are the types of collaborations that he often would pride himself on being able to work with Liberals and work across the aisle, whether that's small L constituents or big L colleagues. And he was completely muzzled. Obviously, I don't know that as like a fact, but I can tell you, having him be my MP for now, this is the third cycle, there's been a huge change in behavior. So that's one thing. There's two other points I want to come back to that you guys were talking about. The first is the immigrants thing, Rio, because that's super interesting. And that's something that's particularly interesting in Alberta, because the immigrant vote is so complicated, because oftentimes immigrants are already conservative, but they're also immigrants. So like you were saying, right, the abortion thing, because a lot of the time, especially in your community, Catholicism, right?
Yep.
So I've always just been fascinated by the struggle of immigrants. I've had talks with my Filipino neighbors. They're also very conservative, but they also, this year, one of them was talking about how like they just really didn't know what to do with everything happening in the US. And I mean, again, didn't matter in our city, but these are the struggles that I've been hearing from people that are, first generation Canadians, or immigrated over and then got their citizenship, what to do with that. And then the second thing that I want to really point out is when you were talking about Ontario, German, there's also this idea about Quebec. Which is a good segue into the Liberals, because I also want to talk about the Liberals for our last segment.
Point quickly about the immigrant thing, because it's funny you bring up the immigrant thing, Rio, because I actually had a conversation with my friend the day before the Monday. I had dinner with him on Sunday, and his parents are heavily conservative in nature because they're Christian based, and they were going to vote conservative, and they were trying to convince him to vote for the Conservative Party. And of course, he was kind of like, where do I go? Where do I park my vote? I don't agree with Poilievre, but at the same time, I don't agree with Carney. I question some things. And I sort of had to educate him and said, first, number one, listen to our podcast, number one, and hear what we have to say. And second of all, just educate yourself. Because he said, why are you supporting one party or one person over the other? I said, these are my reasons, but this is where I stand on these things. And I said that he needs to know kind of what's important to him. I told him, for example, arts and culture funding is something that I'm passionate about. So the Liberals are doing that. Are the Conservatives doing that? Not necessarily, right? They might be funding Indigenous stuff. So I said, you really have to dive into this stuff and understand basically what is important to you and what you can give up. Because his parents are heavily Christian, heavily conservative. Not telling to vote conservative, but so he's really confused. And his parents are immigrants just like my parents are, right? So it's really interesting to kind of see that struggle, like you mentioned, Nicole.
It's actually really, what's really interesting to me as a sociologist is watching how the right wing has managed to connect themselves to religion. I mean, we can look at Trump. He doesn't give a flying fuck about religion. He was sleeping through the Pope's funeral. He does not give a shit. That guy is not religious.
And also, you see how many people getting married and etc.
Yeah, right. Like, no, bullshit. I don't know if Poilievre's religious or not. I haven't like looked that much into it, and he never really like in any of the speeches I saw said anything. But Carney is. He was like giving an interview outside of his church one day.
He's heavily Catholic too.
Very, very Catholic. But what's also interesting with the immigrant vote, because a lot of the time you will hear abortion come up, neither party is touching the abortion issue with a 10-foot pole. Conservatives, even Stephen Harper, like he was like, him allowing his MPs to vote freely was a scandal. That the one time he did, and he never did it again. The next time it came up, he was like, he stomped the shit out of that. That was one place Poilievre was very clear about this time around too, was we are not going to bring up the abortion thing again, because they know that it wouldn't fly in Canada. So it's always just been super interesting to me how the right has managed to just sort of like wrangle that Christian vote. Like, you're not Christian if you're not a conservative.
Yeah. And that's what I constantly get too from everyone I know.
Yeah.
And they're saying like, how can you support these things? I'm not going to debate abortion or anything like that, but because that's not the point. But like, I'm not like, people criticize me because I vote these ways, and they're saying, aren't you a Christian? Aren't you a Catholic? Aren't you these things? That's fine, but I can choose who represents certain other things that are more important to me. That issue is, I get that issue is important for some people, but it's not an important issue for me that I have to vote a certain way, right?
Yeah, and I actually mentioned that to like my girlfriend's family too. I was like, at the end of the day, with a lot of these platforms and with like just the way that the system is set up, like especially for elections, it's just that you're always going to have to prioritize what matters most to you, right? And like, I'll pick on just myself as an example. Like, I don't particularly like abortion. One of the issues I was like, not like, I'm pro it, but I'm not gonna I'm not gonna base my entire vote around it, right?
Because you're a man. Continue.
Yeah, exactly. which is an absolutely fair criticism.
We're also not in the US, so
yeah, exactly.
Yeah. But,
it's like,
well, at the end of the day, you have to decide what the issues are important for you at the end of the day, right? And I think people have to understand like certain issues are going to be a strong point for you, and certain issues like I'm pro-choice and I'm being a Catholic, people would be upset with that normally. Yeah, right? Because that's the issue that people like, and that's the thing. People are like, I'm pro-choice, full disclosure, and so people would definitely like the ones who are from the Catholic Church or even Christianity would say, "How can you vote for a party that is not pro-life?" Right? So for me, that's the way I look at it. That issue is.
But that's what I mean about the conservatives managing to wrangle that, because there are plenty of conservative MPs that are pro-life and have voted that way when they got the free vote from Harper. So it's just fascinating to me how the right has managed to just be like, we're the religious party. If you're Christian and you're not conservative, you're not a real Christian. At the end of it, it's weird. And
I think people are just surprised generally how much progressive voice is actually in Alberta. Because when you hear all these people talk about like, how are the Liberals still winning the election? It's because there's a lot of progressive people still around. Even though Liberals aren't winning seats in Calgary and Alberta, there's still half the people who are voting progressively and Liberal.
Well, that's why, like, and this will be our like the last couple things here. That's why the NDP vote is that's why they're the official opposition in Alberta. Albertans hate Liberals, and so progressives went with NDP. And to be clear, the NDP in Alberta are not the federal NDP. They're an NDP Alberta party, which is more like if you actually look at their policies and stuff, and they will not like this, but they are progressive conservatives. And they have freaking Nenshi as their leader, which was influenced by a whole lot of people just getting memberships to vote Nenshi. So there's that. And then the last thing I'll say about the conservatives, because I want to move on to the Liberals, is just like this idea. We talked about how they need to get the votes in Ontario. They need to start being liked again in Quebec, because Quebec also holds quite a lot of seats. they hated Poilievre. One of the big things in Germany, I think you and I have talked about this before, voters there continuously were telling Chantal from CBC that they didn't like how he treated media, because people in Quebec see the media as a voice for their sovereignty. And frankly, Poilievre is a jackass to the media. So he has never been liked, going like even before he was leader of the party. And as Chantal rightfully said, like, Quebec is the second most important place for seats, even with bloc seats being heavy in Quebec. Quebec's the reason why Carney has such a strong minority government right now, which is a great segue into the Liberals, because it's great. Let's celebrate. Like, if you were somebody that was really scared of Poilievre, like me, being like really into human rights and like policy and digging like kind of past surface area Poilievre, I was relieved. Bring Carney on. But that quickly dissipates when you realize just how insane of an election this is. NDP voters lent Carney their vote. Bloc voters lent Carney their vote. Those seats that flipped were like secure bloc seats. This isn't a sudden surge of the Liberal Party, which is why I think they need to be really careful about looking at these as true gains. And I think the Conservatives also need to be careful about looking at this as true gains. Like I said, around, that's one of the reasons why I'm so interested in what happened around Windsor and those areas, because are these real gains, or are these, we're lending you our vote because X, whether that's because we need to keep Poilievre out, because we need to keep Trump from invading our country, because our jobs, like whatever the reason was, there was a lot of vote lending going on. And I think both the Conservatives and the Liberals need to figure out where the lending was. And one of those places we know for Carney was Quebec. And so, yes, celebrate, rock out to down with Webster, that's fine. But now you also have to keep your eye on, okay, how do I win again in 4 years?
Yep.
Because there was, that vote lending was insane. There was a lot of it. And I think one of the ways, because yes, he is only short, what, 3-4 votes? Not even 169. So 3 votes in the House.
Yep.
But you know, the NDP and the Bloc are going to keep a stranglehold on their caucus. They will vote as one. We don't know if it'll be issue by issue or if they'll actually come up with an agreement. I suspect it'll be issue by issue. It's possible the NDP makes an agreement because they're not in a position right now where they can afford another election. So I think we will see this government hold for at least 2 years while the NDP gets their shit together, while the Conservatives figure it out. Because even if they keep Poilievre, he's not getting back into the House until January, probably. Once somebody steps down, Carney doesn't have to call an election for 6 months. Then that election happens, and then winter break will happen. So chances are, even if he does stay on, he's not going back in that House till January, end of January 2026. The Greens, I mean, there's one vote. Elizabeth May can like figure out what she's going to do on her own, but she's definitely not voting the Conservatives. She'll probably lend her vote to the Liberals. So that means that they need 2. So the big question that I have is like, how much does Carney actually work with the Bloc? Because he's going to have to show that he is fighting for Quebecers in a bid to hang on to at least some of those Quebec seats to help him in the next election. More than the Conservatives, Carney needs to be focused on the election at the same time he's focusing on Trump.
Yep. And I actually have a thought on that, because like you've mentioned this before, Nick, that the media being, you know, the Quebec voice of sovereignty, right, is a very important thing. And I think Carney promising right out the gate of like 150 million to the CBC and then making it harder to defund the CBC was one of those things that will just help him secure that going forward. Because like that shows like A, that he takes the issue seriously, and B, if/when he actually does it, then that he's actually serious about maintaining that and like trying to build that relationship some more. So that said, I think that he kind of does need to consider like actually working a little bit more with these Francois Blanchette, which is going to be a little bit weird because that's kind of like a weird parties on the right kind of alliance. But
even Blanchette, like, I don't know if you listened to his speech yesterday, but he said basically sovereignty's got to go aside for a minute. And even though that's always front and center for him, Trump and what's going to happen going forward over the next few months is more important than that. So he made it clear that he's willing to work with Carney, probably because he also can't afford, like, none of them can really afford to bring down Carney right now is part of the problem. Generally speaking, 18 to 24 months is sort of where a minority government in Canada lasts. Obviously, the last one at 3 years was sort of an outlier. But the NDP or the Bloc cannot be the ones that bring down this party immediately. Even the Conservatives, like we said, they can't right now. They have to figure out their own leadership. But like Canadians will be pissed. If a party brings them down in the next 2 years, Canadians aren't going to act kindly to that. They don't want an election. They want them to get their shit together and figure out Trump and the economic situation. And they don't want to have to spend millions on another election that's going to put that stuff off. Thoughts, German?
Yeah, you bring up a good point. And I'm going to touch on the whole election thing you talked about, right? I think Canadians clearly sent a mandate to Mark Carney to govern. And they clearly sent a mandate to Pierre Poilievre and Jagmeet Singh this election, and even the Conservatives and NDP and all the parties involved. They clearly said, we want you to work with each other. We want you to work with each other and find compromise.
6 years running.
And find consensus across the table. And they clearly said, we don't like these leaders that are not performing, like Pierre Poilievre, for example, and not showing up and being crazy and attack dog. We want civility and we want things to get done. And I think they showed that, I like what Doug Ford always says, the election and electors are always right. Like, they're never wrong. And I think in this case, they clearly told, we want you to work together. We believe in Carney and we want him to lead us through this crisis, right? But at the same time, we're lending votes from these parties to give you that, right?
Yeah, and I think we have to be careful with the word mandate. Like, I heard mandate from the Liberal side, and I was like, you didn't get a mandate. The mandate is work together.
Yep.
Like,
and I think that's the key word. I think
the minority government mandate is you have to work with the other parties.
Yeah, and like there was an interview he gave today where he was like, basically saying, we won. And this is like the arrogant thing that we talked about the other day, German. And I think this is something Mark Carney needs to be really careful about. Yes, Pierre Poilievre was more of a douche to the press, but like, we've seen moments from Carney, whether or not that's because he's a new politician, he's frustrated with what he has to do. We saw moments with Rosemary Barton where he wasn't happy that she was mad at him, and kind of like knowing sort of the like paying attention to everything. We could kind of figure out Rosemary was mad. He gave 2 hours to a US podcast the day before her 16-minute interview. And that was a point of contention through the entire election for them. She was even still a little bit like, not like mean, but you could tell like Carney isn't her flavor right now, right? And he's not mean to the press, but he's short. He'll flat out say, like, I'm not answering that question. He is a red Tory, a progressive conservative, and he still has some of those, whether it's unlikable characteristics that sort of linger around conservatives, or just the fact that he's not used to the position that he's in. And yes, I guess there's something to be said with being patient with somebody who's brand new to politics, but I don't think he has time to like fuck around with this and learn. He needs to get that under control.
His reach and his way, his runway for error is very small right now.
Yeah.
People elected him for that reason. They wanted someone stable. They wanted someone firm, and they wanted someone to show up. And if he doesn't show up in the next election and doesn't show up now, he's not going to get elected again.
Yeah.
So
he'll be Paul Martin.
Look at the people they kicked out. They kicked out Pierre Poilievre and they kicked out Jagmeet Singh. Jagmeet Singh is one of the nicest guys from what I've heard.
Yeah, but I think Jagmeet was kicked out because people were, and that one was weird. Who won that riding? Was it a liberal or a conservative?
Yeah, I think it was a liberal.
It was the liberal. Yeah, that was done. See, that was just weird to me because that one, I'm not sure if they were upset with Singh or if this was, we need to get the liberals past the post.
Yeah, and I think people have to realize that, like
this election was just weird.
This election, and I think I know people would say, that we're upset because the Conservatives didn't win, this and that. They clearly sent a mandate to the Liberals to govern and to work with other parties, right? Which is why the Conservatives probably increased their vote as well, right? And a few NDP and Bloc went to the Liberals and the Conservatives. So I think, and they got rid of the actual Green stuff. They only have Elizabeth May there. So I think that's why they went these votes. And so they want to see parties work together and come to some workable arrangement with each other.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, I think there was a lot of left people, such as NDP and Greens, that were just terrified about what Poilievre was going to do.
Yeah.
However, I think, and I know we've talked a lot about the Conservatives, but I think that Carney being a progressive conservative isn't enough for mainstream Conservatives, especially in Saskatchewan and Alberta.
No.
So he's really going to need to work with the Conservatives. See, and this is the other thing. So he's going to need to work with Conservatives, and he already said that he's willing to do that. His first phone call, which was apparently a supportive phone call, was to Pierre Poilievre after his celebratory thing. And I think this is something else the Conservatives need to consider when they're considering whether or not to keep Poilievre on. Do they, in this minority government, keep Poilievre on, knowing, and if they do, this is their own fault, knowing he's an attack dog and what he's going to do in that parliament, which will be to go out every day, and whether that's yelling... whether that's yelling about how Mark Carney is just Justin Trudeau or terrible liberal policies. And I'm not saying don't hold the government to account. You should absolutely do that. But his way of doing it isn't helpful. So do the Conservatives look at this and go, okay, we're in a minority government. There is an opportunity to work with the Liberals here. Do we need a new leader to be able to start that? Because if we look at, for example, the end of Harper's parliament, we know the Liberals most of the time voted with the Conservatives. The running joke in our household is they're the same freaking party. Most of the Liberals voted for Harper's tough on crime legislation. A lot of people don't know that. A lot of small L Liberals were pissed when Trudeau voted for that particular legislation, and his caucus did. So it's not unheard of for Conservatives and Liberals to work together on the floor. And that doesn't really make it out a lot to the Canadian public. But I do wonder in this weird election and what people are going to, because Trump's here for 3.5 years. So I do wonder, is it in the Conservatives' best interest to basically start from scratch and find somebody who can work with those Liberals and maybe push some of their policies, whether that be border security? I mean, I don't think they're going to get to push their let's ignore the Supreme Court thing. But there are some conservative policies that other economists during this election, former parliamentary budgetarian officers have said would be good in this circumstance. And we've already seen Carney being open, having adopted both conservative and NDP policies. Rio, thoughts?
Come back to me later, I'm thinking.
German thoughts?
I'm also currently reading Pierre Poilievre's Wikipedia page to try and just be Is there a better alternative?
Honestly, you make a good point about those things, Nick. And I think if I'm thinking it through, I really don't think the Conservatives can become non-attack dog-like, to be honest with you. The one thing
about that.
But the problem that they have is that they're power hungry right now. I think it's the problem. They're extremely power hungry because they haven't been in government for
I think, okay, I don't mean to interrupt you, but maybe let's look at this a different way. Yes, the Conservatives need to have an attack dog, but it shouldn't be the leader. Remember, Harper was very prime ministerial. He never really attacked in the way that we see now. That's what Poilievre was there for. Poilievre was the one that went out.
But you have to realize Poilievre wants to be in government, in the prime minister's seat. And that
but it doesn't matter what Poilievre wants right now. What matters is what the caucus says.
Yeah, and also it depends on the membership too. If the membership want him there, they're going to put him there whether you want.
100%.
So that's a problem.
But this is what they need to think about.
And
that's what's best for them.
And that's important. But at the same time, do you really think if they are going to appease their base, at least some of their base, are they going to do that?
Their base right now, look at that. Look at those numbers. Their base is Alberta and Saskatchewan. They're voting for them anyway.
Yeah.
And Poilievre got booted, and they made gains in other parts of Ontario. I don't think they need Poilievre.
I have people talking about skepticism to me right now.
That always happens every year for every election for 14 years.
And I know it's crazy, right? And so I think people have to understand the Conservatives really need to pivot is the end of the day, right? Yeah. And they need to, if they want Poilievre there, he can't be that leader to pivot.
Yeah,
and he's not going to be the leader to pivot. We've seen him do that. Not to say he can't pivot or he won't pivot. He's not willing to pivot is the problem, right? If he's willing to pivot, that's not the issue. He would have had his seat a long time ago and it would have kept it. But I think
he possibly would have been prime minister right now if he'd pivoted early enough.
And I think the problem is that the Conservatives really need to take it inside and figure out, do they want to pivot or do they not? If they don't want to pivot, then they're not going to win the election at this rate.
Yeah, and I guess that's what I'm saying, right? If they're smart, they will be like, sorry, Poilievre, bye. But I don't know that they are.
Yeah. And that's my worry. That's what I'm trying to say. Are they going to? Would be my question. And are they really wanting to do it? I don't think so, personally.
Yeah.
I really and the way Poilievre is going out and saying this and that, we're going to fight and change takes time. That doesn't sound like an opportunity that they want to. They change. They don't want to pivot. Yeah. Right. And I don't see Poilievre wanting to do that.
But how many more elections do they lose before? That, I guess that was one of the things I was super frustrated about with Jason Kenney, because he sat on CBC and he was like, yeah, I mean, I don't know if he's really going anywhere. People like him. And I just wanted to shake him and be like, do you ever want to have power again? I'm not saying that the Liberals sort of have a stranglehold here, but if we don't see some pivoting from Conservatives, I don't think it's too far out of reach to say that the next election could be another minority Liberal government if they don't do some soul searching here.
Yeah.
And it works with Mark Carney too as well. Mark Carney needs to make sure he is adapting and stuff like that.
He needs to basically be campaigning the whole time he's in government.
Yeah. And like you said, he's not appeasing the Conservative voters in Alberta at all. Like people who are voting Conservatives hate him. They think he's Justin Trudeau. Right?
They just hate
anything red.
It doesn't matter. If he was offered Harper's finance minister position, if he had been finance minister, they would have liked him back then. Yeah. Which is hilarious, because let's say he was Harper's finance minister and then got Liberal prime minister, that would have been, I would have loved to see that, because Conservatives would have been like, yeah, we hate him. And that's, I guess, the other thing that just really bothers me. Rio and I have talked about this extensively. Politics as a team sport is so dangerous. Yep. And I know that you were like, oh, voters are always right. Voters aren't always right. It just doesn't matter, because voters are the ones that make the decision. Carney is a progressive conservative. If you actually look at, like, read what he's written in the past, watch him, his Harper era interviews, pay attention to words that he's using, read the platform. If you read the platform cover to cover, you would see conservative phrases and underlining tones in there. Yeah. You would think that that would matter to people in Alberta that vote NDP, which is weird because Alberta, NDP is our official opposition. They don't get a small number of votes. But when you look at how that translates federally, all these people still vote conservative. And if people are actually paying attention to these two leaders, Mark Carney is, like I said, a progressive conservative that should be appealing to those hardcore NDP, like the people that vote NDP provincially in Alberta. Yep. And they're just not. And that's partially due to identity politics and this idea, which seems to be like really, really ingrained in Alberta specifically, at just generational voting of conservatives. I had a friend who told me she doesn't know why she votes conservative. It's just, that's what her parents always taught her to do. And that's what their parents did. I wanted to shake her too and be like,
I actually have a really interesting thought about that because I was on Reddit, as I usually am during the day. And
shocking.
Yeah, and then there was a comment I saw. It was a post talking about like Alberta Smith and their separatist rhetoric, right? And like someone was saying, like, it's really weird coming from Ontario, moving to Alberta, where in Ontario the people seem to dictate the government, but in Alberta the government seems to dictate the people, right? Yeah. And that's where you have that like really, and that's where I've always like to talk about like the politics as a team sport thing, because like, well, now you have like basically just like this massive mega brand of conservative that you get in Alberta and Saskatchewan, and people just identify with it like so intensely, and they don't want to let that go.
I know, it's so bad.
Yeah, and even when I point out, I'm like, I mean, I have like, just as an example, like having like friends or relatives that like, you know, take advantage of social services or healthcare or go to the hospital once in a while, right? And it's like, you are aware that like the conservatives are the ones who have consistently cut hospitals for the last like 50 years, right? Like,
I saw so many comments about, I think I was talking to you about this, German, the IVF thing.
Yeah.
Was that you? There was somebody on my Facebook community page that was complaining about IVF in Alberta and how it's like not covered at all. Yeah. But Ontario has coverage on IVF and like, but fuck the West was what she said. And I was like, dude, that is a provincial thing. The UCP are the ones not covering IVF. Ontario, under Doug Ford, a progressive conservative, chose to cover however many sessions of IVF they do. And on like page 3 under healthcare on Carney's platform, the main thing he talks about in healthcare is getting IVF coverage for families.
You know,
talk about like being completely uneducated.
You look at like the concerns. The conservatives in Alberta, they were in government for 40 years, and did they do the things that they want to do? Say that they're supposed to do now? No. So it's like I have my friend who just responded to me saying like honestly, like there's lots of support for separatization this time, and I'm sitting there like I'm just saying, you know, like, and here's the thing, they're bullshit. We all leave Alberta, and I'm kidding. They're like, are you freaking kidding me? Like,
this is another weird thing with conservatives.
They have a weird persona about them, and they're
always like, I'm gonna leave the country. Like, there was somebody else that was talking about on the community page, and they were like, we're moving to Texas. The nice thing was the very first comment to them was, okay, well, you look brown in your picture, so try not to be sent to El Salvador.
You know, it's like the conservatives just take these things so, I don't know how you want to put it. Like, it's like to the core. Like
I don't know. I didn't like.
It's just weird, right? And
I never said that I was gonna leave Canada if Harper won government.
This guy is a liberal guy too. He actually attended a Justin Trudeau rally before. That's where I met the guy.
Maybe he doesn't like progressive conservatives.
I don't know, but like
Wow.
it's crazy. He just kept on complaining how it's so expensive and everything and this and that. I get
And
it.
that's a legitimate concern
It
from
is.
people. And I think that like, and that's why I'm so interested to hear from people. And I think I might put a call out on Blue Sky and Twitter. Ugh, I might actually have to sign up for Twitter. I don't want to. Okay, we'll come back to that. But like, I'm really curious to just like talk to people about what it was like. Was Carney just not enough after Trudeau? Because the thing with Trudeau is he was very far left, and he was not willing to see that like his tax policies just weren't working, and in this age that we're living in was making things really unaffordable. And I wonder if a lot of the people that voted for Conservative at the end of the day, maybe they didn't like Poilievre, and that's something that we've seen. But they also have to keep in mind like affordability. And one of the things I've really been trying to grapple with the last few days is just, I guess, empathy for people. One of the things my husband said to me one day, because he was kind of like quiet and he doesn't really like talking about politics. And there's been a lot of that in this house over the last week. And he finally just said, like, you know, it just feels like, and he's not even a conservative. He is like, if anything, NDP. But he was just like, it just feels like even in his Slack chat at work that like there was a lot of gloating going on from Liberals instead of like actual empathy for people on the other side that are like justifiably really concerned about affordability and housing. And I think to win those swing voters like Gen Z didn't just decide like, oh, Poilievre. If Carney delivers on affordability and food prices, like he could find himself getting the Gen Z vote again, because we know Gen Z, especially Gen Z males, are more likely to vote conservative over liberal, especially right now. And so I'm trying to come at this with a piece of empathy. And I think that if the Liberals were smart, they would be doing the same, and they would be making sure that they're empathetic to Quebec, to the Bloc, who have real sovereignty, language identity issues. I'm not saying that like, yay, Quebec separatism, but that movement is based in a real thing to hold on to culture. Like we know that the majority of Quebecers don't necessarily want to separate, but they do want their sovereignty and they want people to respect that. People out west, there's concerns over the oil patch and that being shut down. That's going to impact their livelihoods. Anyway, I've talked enough. So like, Rio, thoughts? German, thoughts?
Yeah, I totally agree with you, right? I know Rio's pretty quiet, but
I was trying to get ready to say like
he processes.
But I don't
yeah,
want to.
and I get that. I
don't want to just start ranting about social media marketing and like AI algorithms, and because that's where it's going to go. That's where I'm going to go.
Yeah, I get that. You know, like, and I totally agree with you. Like, I think we need to come from a place of empathy and compassion, right? Those are real issues. Those are important things, and those are things that need to be dealt with. Like anything relating to affordability, housing prices, those are really important stuff. And those are really hard stuff too. But when I think we have to separate empathy and compassion, and when people start to criticize and be personal, that is a problem. I think when people start to say you're no Christian just because you voted liberal, that's a problem, right?
But those are things that politicians can like that's being fed, right? Like people are influenced by what they're seeing. Like look at the US. Look at how polarized that is. That is absolutely pushed in media. And I just feel like people do need to take a step back and have empathy for people. Like, why would a woman probably be pro-choice?
Yeah, but it's also really sorry, Jeremy.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say, I think that's something that's really hard to kind of cultivate, though. And this is something that's kind of, I've talked about it with like my martial arts teacher as an example, like a few times of like, well, it's really easy to be like, well, I know how to do that. Like, I know how to like say, punch someone in the face really hard, choke them out, like do a kimura, break their arm, that kind of deal. And like, it's really easy to say you can do that, but it's really hard to realize like, in the moment you shouldn't, or like there's a better alternative, or there's another way to approach that situation that doesn't involve violence or conflict. And like it's really and he was actually former law enforcement. That's something that for him that he really had to like work on, was that like understanding that like, yes, you know, I can do these things, but that doesn't mean I should. And sometimes the best option isn't, you know, all right, you're getting like, we're going to pick you up, throw you down, throw you in cuffs, and throw you in the car. It's, we're going to need to have a conversation here, and then we're going to de-escalate the situation and understand that I understand you're a person, you need to understand I'm a person, and then that's the conversation we need to have from there, right? And it's really hard to do that, and especially now, like I've talked to my neighbors twice, like since I moved, and like both of the times it's like to their mom, just because I've seen her outside in the backyard while I was in the backyard.
Yeah.
And like I've waved hi to his dad twice, and like I was like, hey, just trying to be a friendly neighbor here so we don't get like, you know, mad at each other one day if like I'm doing something weird. But like I've never had a real conversation with them. And like even my before I moved too, like I could talk to my neighbors, and like I knew their first names. I don't know the names of one of their wives, which is really hard because I was like, I see her the most often and I don't know her name, so I don't know what to call her.
And then it becomes too late to ask. I've totally been there.
We lived there 6 years and I still don't know her name. And I was like, cool, I feel really bad, but
I think that's why we need to see unity from the top, though.
Yeah.
And why it's so important for, regardless of what rhetoric and separatist bullshit is coming out of Alberta, Carney basically needs to like continue talking about getting the pipeline at the same time as the electricity grid that he took from the NDP platform, right? Like,
and
I'm not saying like he should ignore it, but kind of like ignore it.
Yeah,
like address it, but address it in a way through like unity and action instead of just like yelling about stupid Albertans.
Yeah. And policy-wise too, I think something that he needs to start doing, and like something a lot of Canadians need to start understanding too, is that a lot of these policies are complementary, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like Energy East, as an example, can feed into an electricity, like a national electricity grid, which is something we need. That's a security issue. So like,
which is exactly something Carney's talked about.
Yeah, and I think,
God, I hope he does like even a quarter of what he said he's gonna do.
I know, but I think a lot of it is just that people tend to think that, oh, well, my team didn't win, therefore I'm not going to get anything I want. But then they don't realize that, like, no, your team, you can still get things you want, because politics really isn't a team sport. And like, we need to kind of get out of that mindset of politics being a team sport, especially in Alberta, where it's like, you're either conservative or you're NDP. And like, you know, Jeremy, what you were talking about earlier, where it's like, well, you're not a good Christian if you're not conservative, right? Like getting out of those mindsets and like just so attached to these identities. And like, this is sociology stuff that fucking we have to talk about one day. You know, getting out of those mindsets and getting out of that is just, that's the challenge. And like, I think Carney did a good job saying like, you know what, Canada needs to be strong and unified right now, but him acting on that now is the challenge that he has to face while still campaigning every single day for the next 2 years.
And he did like, so for example, he started talking about the Energy East corridor after Jagmeet brought it up in the debate, and it made its way into his platform. There was a couple conservative policies that made its way into the platform. And I guess I'm just like, one of the things with Carney, because I don't really know what to expect, but I'm hopeful that maybe we'll start to see an amalgamation of policies that might actually be good for the country instead of this like divisive, what's best for my team stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that whole rhetoric needs to be cooled down, and it comes from the top down at the end of the day. And like Carney and whoever the prime minister, whether it's Carney, whether it was Pierre Poilievre maybe before, right? Whoever it was, right? It needs to be top down, and it needs to be talked about all the time, right? And you need to be a team candidate, and you need to be unified, right? And you need to stand up for what's best for the country. And just because the Conservatives didn't get voted in doesn't mean you won't get certain things done, right? So I think people have to understand that too. But I think it has to come back, like you said, the identity politics, right? Yeah. And saying like, just because you're a Christian, just because you're a Catholic, doesn't mean you're a conservative. I think that whole identity politics has to be removed from the equation too.
Yeah, I guess so. Like for me, I guess my like bottom line is this. Like this. Do this. Why aren't you capable of it?
And I think that is a great image, actually.
Yeah.
And like it's weird that that's something that we're celebrating now. Is like they literally just shook hands and we're just like, wow. It's so weird to see civility in politics these days.
The moderator said that the producer was screaming in all the earpieces, make sure you're getting this, make sure you're getting this. And he was distracted. He was talking by Sing. And he like suddenly started looking around trying to figure out like what the hell the producer was talking about. And then he saw this and they just like, there was just like a swarm of cameras and stuff that like surrounded them. And I think this picture indicates like Poilievre is capable of this.
Yeah.
He is capable of the pivot. And I think if he is serious about staying on as leader, he needs to figure this out. We saw in his speech that he was capable of being humble. He was capable of talking about unity. Yes, that looks a little bit different for both sides. Again, that's nothing new. And the Conservatives are going to have more like far right policies that maybe I don't necessarily agree with. But like this shows it's possible. This was after the English debate.
Yep.
And you know, I think this picture just shows what we need to do just in general, right? Just everything we do, right? We don't always have to agree, but we have to work together. And I think that's the big thing, right?
Yeah.
And like I think Doug Ford is doing a fabulous job right now.
No, how weird does that sound?
And I know, like I like what he's doing because it shows he's putting his country, his province, and his cities first. And that's important for this time, especially we're going through a war, right?
I'm glad he burned his MAGA hat.
And like, yes, he might be, you know, like have certain views, but he like you heard what he said when he came out this week, right?
If Doug Ford is capable of learning, I believe in the Conservatives. Like, because Doug Ford was a MAGA. He had a MAGA hat. He was pro-Trump. He was very happy when Trump won. And then he had reality smash him in the face.
Yeah.
And that's what we need people to act like that, because that's the only way things get done. And that's the only way we can work together. And doesn't mean just because a certain government's in place doesn't mean you can't get your stuff is done. You have to work with other parties to get it done.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. And that's why I'm really thankful we're in a minority government situation too, because it's like we're in that situation now where the Liberal government is forced to work with other parties, and like he's adopted NDP and Conservative policies into his platform. Great,
but follow through.
Yeah, but the follow through is where we need to see it now. And like this is kind of a side note, kind of related, and like something that kind of came up because I remember there's a podcast I like to listen to called Philosophize This, and in one of the episodes, one of the philosophers they cover discusses like how easy it is to kind of forget that you're in a country full of other people that think differently from you. And Nicole, you and I have talked about this as well, where it's like, I forgot Halifax kind of existed for a little bit until I got sent there for a conference for work one day. And then I was like, oh, right, there's a whole ass maritime Canada that I just haven't heard of.
And the perspective that comes out of there, right? Like one of the things that was talked about on election night, because people were like, wow, the polls were really wrong. And like, I hate to go back to David Cochrane again, but he's from like out there. And he was like, yeah, but the fisheries are out there. And it's not like liberal policies have been great for lobster fishermen. So it isn't exactly a surprise that those people have a different perspective and move to the Conservative Party in order to save what is their livelihoods.
Yeah. So like, and this is just a side note, but I mean, something I think about a lot since I've heard that podcast is like, there needs to be some way to actually get people to realize that like those are different perspectives, and we have to learn how to incorporate those into our own thinking. Because like I'll totally concede I'm guilty of it. I go into my own little echo chambers and rabbit holes, and like, you know, I hear what I want to hear, same as anybody else. But we need to find a way to really move past that and realize that like, no, we're Canadian. Like that's it. We share a flag, a love of maple syrup. Like, you know,
I actually don't like maple syrup. Does that
heresy? Oh my god!
Oh my gosh! You might get some feedback on that.
I hate maple syrup.
But like,
oh boy!
Am I deported to the U.S.?
Okay, what else do Canadians like? Mini donuts, coffee, like we're the second
Tim
biggest
Hortons,
coffee
maybe?
drinkers in the world. Yeah.
I'm offended by Tim Hortons too, so
Yeah.
Oh, you're gonna get some pushback on that from some people.
come at me. Their coffee sucks and their donuts are frozen. Come at me. Although, you know what? I will welcome that in if that's what's in the comments. Sure.
Full disclosure, I feel the same way about Tim's. I don't like the coffee and I think the donuts taste weird. And the sandwiches are all like, no.
Plus their exploitation of Filipino people.
That too. So
That's a
but
problem.
it started with the food thing and then
Great
the
place to
exploitation
leave
thing
it.
came later.
No, but all kidding aside, I think it's so important. Like when things get tough, this like you see that even the difficult color backgrounds too.
Yeah.
Right? And I think that's so important to realize. Technically, we're all trying to make the world better and we're trying to make the country better. So why not be a bit more consensus building, you can call it?
Yeah.
And less confrontational would be the way to put it.
Well,
Right.
it would certainly ease my anxiety. All right. That's a really good place to leave it. We've been going just over an hour, which I think is going to be like our shortest podcast ever. Go us. Any last words? No? Great. Okay. So I'm not sure when our next episode is going to be. German and I are going to sit down and figure out, because obviously our Canadian election show is over. I can't speak for him, but I really enjoyed our conversations. So I'm going to send you an email and see if we can't come up with something else. And Rio and I have to figure out when we're going to record our next venture into Trump's America. Shit is happening. So we will see you guys next time.
Thank you for
Goodbye.
listening.